Welcome to Basic Searching. In today's session, we'll learn about building a search strategy, the search process, how to pick the best database for your topic, some tips for more efficient searches, and how to build a search, which we'll do as a live demo in Embase. Here we have the search process in map form. If you spend a few extra moments at the start of your search approaching it systematically following this line, you'll save time in the end and have a stronger results pool to work with. I won't read through the whole thing as this is what we will be discussing throughout, but it's a great visual reminder of your steps. The first point about databases I want to make is that you never want to use just one for your research. While there's often a fair amount of overlap in these databases, there are journals that may be in one database but not the other. A good rule of thumb is 3 databases to help make sure you don't miss a key journal. Unfortunately, this is not a guarantee, so if you know of a few major journals that you should be getting results on but you're not, please reach out to your librarian or watch our quick video on how to find specific journals. The list of databases shown here, and even the A to Z list on the library homepage, are not all of the databases available. They're the major health sciences databases, but if you're working on something interdisciplinary, consider databases outside of health. However, for this class, we're going to stick with health-related databases. For example, if you were working on a nursing-related project, you'd want to consider perhaps CINAHL, which is a nursing and allied health-focused database, along with Pubmed or Embase, which are broader health-focused databases. And for your third option, a broad database like Scopus or Web of Science are a good bet to catch some of the outlier articles. You will get to know the databases you use for your research pretty well, and we'll start to pick favorites, but remember to adapt to the topic. Now for some general searching tips. First, it's important to be aware of different spelling. For example, UK spelling and American spelling. You want to include both so you don't miss articles that use the different spelling. However, it's important to note that some databases already automatically link the words. However, it's not been perfected yet, and not all of the databases automatically make that connection. Or in some cases, options you select during your search could stop that from occurring automatically as well. But more on that later. So until all of the databases are on the same page, it's best to err on the side of caution and include the options yourself. This also applies to making sure you have your synonyms gathered together to assure that you don't miss an article on a topic because the author used an alternate term. We'll talk about controlled vocabulary on the next slide. Abbreviations and articles can be tricky. It's a best practice to include the abbreviations in your search, unless, of course, it's an abbreviation like ED that could stand for multiple concepts, and including it in your search may bring back results that are not related to your topic. The last tip we have here is to use field searching. This option limits where the database searches for your term. You may be used to searching for a specific author's name, and this is the same sort of option. However, in research, you'd want to mainly limit your search to the title and/or the abstract. This usually helps clear out results, like a person's professional affiliation matching your search terms, even if they're writing about an article that is not in that area. These options most often exist as drop-down boxes, so you don't have to worry about putting them into your search manually, though as you get more used to the databases, you may decide to add them yourself, whatever works best for you. Now for controlled vocabulary, which simply put is a predetermined set of terms or phrases used to describe the most relevant aspects of an article. You can think of it as a tag in social media, although it's applied by a professional, not crowdsourced. It can be very useful when starting a search because they often have a list of synonyms included in the record. So if you're not familiar with some of the other terms you may want to include in your search, you can find them there. They unfortunately do not carry database to database, so you will have to search them in each database, and not all databases have them. In Pubmed, you use mesh, and in CINAHL subject headings. It's important to have the controlled vocabulary in your search as it helps assure that your results will be on point. However, because these terms are applied to the digital record of these articles by professional indexers who have to fully read the article, there could be human error or misinterpretation, though this is rare. More likely, the issue is that the term may be delayed being applied to an article because of a backlog of articles to review. For this reason, we strongly recommend having the controlled vocabulary, a free text version of the controlled vocabulary, to catch any articles that may not have had the terms applied yet. So, for example, librarians mesh, if we were in Pubmed, and librarians as a free text. You would also include any of your synonyms for the terms you decide to use. We'll touch on this again during the demo. Now a bit about searching devices. The first searching device is very important. If you are searching for a phrase, you should make sure to put it in quotation marks. Using the quotes will make sure that the database searches for the actual phrase terms together and not the individual words of the phrase as different concepts. So if you search stress reduction without the quotes, the database will look for stress and reduction as independent terms, not necessarily in relation to each other. Truncation is a simple way of cutting down on the number of terms you need to type. If they all have the same base term, you can see here that using the asterisk gathers all of the possible word endings for microbial. The problem with this is the database doesn't necessarily do this perfectly, so if there are typos or spacing issues, it may bring back unusual results that won't help your results. So for truncation, try to use it if you have a term that it would work with, but if you're getting unusual results, have it be one of the first things you check and consider removing, and just typing the variations yourself. The other issue with searching devices is one of the things I mentioned previously, how databases are starting to look for synonyms automatically, but using a search device will turn that option off in most databases. So it's another reason to stay in the habit of putting the synonyms in yourself. Now we're going to talk about Boolean, which is the key to finding your answers. We'll start with and, which is where you get your final answer. And is where the different search concepts come together in the same article. Or is where you link all of those synonyms and controlled vocabulary I've been mentioning so frequently. This searches for any of these words in an article. Not does exactly what it says. It removes an entire concept term from your search. However, it does not do it intelligently. It just wholesale removes the term. So if you're looking only for articles about human studies, not animal studies, and you not out animal studies, you won't get any articles that mention that concept. However, if a study related to your concept started as an animal study but ended with a human study that is relevant, and the authors talk about animal studies at the start of the project, you will have lost that article as well. So we strongly recommend not using not. But if you have a term that is completely making your search results bring back concepts you're not looking for research rise, please reach out to your librarian first before using it in your final research so we can try to determine the risk versus reward of using not. The most efficient way to begin your search is to form a question. And the easiest way to approach this is to break your search down using Pico or another search framework. By forming your questions in these individual concepts, you'll be able to quickly create your search strategy. Pico breaks down as P for the patient or the problem. I most often stands for intervention, though it could also mean therapy or indicator. C is a comparison or a control, and O for the outcome. If needed, the time frame for a study or the type of study or the type of question can also be added along with a setting. It's important to remember that you don't need to use every part of your Pico in your build search, though you can use it to form your whole question. Most often P, I, and C are used. I'll talk about outcome in a moment. Here we have an example of how to break out a Pico question using a very simple question, but this works with more complicated searches as well. If a patient presents with type 2 diabetes, would a low-fat diet or a low-carb diet show better results in blood sugar and improved health? We have our problem, which is type 2 diabetes, our intervention, which is a low-fat diet, and the comparison of a low-carb diet. We do also have the outcome of lowered blood sugar and improved health. However, since the likelihood that most research on these two topics will be looking for a positive outcome of improvement, we don't need to include that in our search. And if we were, we would run the risk of missing possible negative reactions that could cause a bias in our research, which we want to avoid. Here, we have an example of how to break down our previous questions and start building our search with our synonyms. The first concept is our problem concept, diabetes. Here we have the natural language, the controlled vocabulary, in this case we're using mesh, followed by the same for our other two concepts. Each column of synonyms is ORed together. Then each of those columns' results are ANDed together to find the answer. Depending on the database, the controlled vocabulary and what the search builder looks like may change, but this general format of building your search is universal. Here's an example using Pubmed. As mentioned previously, you run each of the concepts individually, then you combine them with AND to find your answer. You can either do this by manually putting all those concepts together or using a database search builder. We recommend doing the latter as it cuts down on the risk of error and also makes it easier on more complicated searches to quickly add and remove search terms from the individual concepts and then rerun the search. It also helps with handling the parentheses needed to make your search run correctly, which just like in math, depend on order of operation. So you have to have your parentheses correct. The search builder will handle this for you, though if you wanted to and you were comfortable, you could type them in yourself. But it's now what? First and foremost, review your search results. Are there new terms to add? Terms to remove? If there are, add those in and run your search again to check. Searching is an iterative process. It's never your first search and done. You might do this a few times. After you're sure that you've gotten the terms you need, you can now start to add things like search limiters such as date range or language. Remember not to add these limiters to your search before you feel it's complete so you don't miss terminology that may be useful for synonyms. Now, a quick note, the one filter we strongly suggest not using in research is the full text limiter. Don't select full text unless you have to have an article at that exact moment. We may be able to find the article in another database, or we can request it using interlibrary loan within a day or two. And of course, my favorite reminder, when in doubt, please ask the librarian. We're here to help. And the second really important reminder, please never ever pay for an article while you are here without checking to see if we can acquire it in another database or using interlibrary loan. This of course applies only to USF students, staff, and faculty, though USF affiliated residents most often can take advantage as well. Also, remember to make sure to keep notes on the databases searched, the search terms used, and what the result counts were. This is good practice, as you'll need to document these for SRs and scoping reviews, but it's also helpful for keeping organized, being able to replicate your search for future research, and being able to respond to questions about why you did or did not include a certain article. Also, consider using a bibliographic software. This allows you to quickly export articles, remove duplicate articles, and cite them in your paper. The library supports EndNote, and you can get it for free with a USF email from software.usf.edu. We also have a class showing you how to use this resource on our YouTube page. And remember to check out our other classes and resources on the USF Library's homepage. And if you have a question, please do not hesitate to reach out to your librarians and make an appointment for reference. We are here to help. Now we're going to do a live demo of our search using Embase. So most importantly, when you're trying to access any of the library databases, it's important that you go through either the library homepage, the library link in Canvas, or the library link in MyUSF. This will assure that you have access to all of the material available to you. And for many of the databases, it's the only way you're going to be able to get access to them. On the library homepage, along with all of the other wonderful information we offer, we have an A to Z health resource list, which has the databases that we use most often. So at the top, we have our popular resources. These are the ones that our health researchers use time and time again, along with some additional health-related databases that are useful. Now, it's important to remember that even this list is not an exclusive list of what you have access to. It's just the major ones that you're probably going to use. So as I said, we're going to use Embase. Now, Embase looks different than some databases, but the general mechanics are universal in the databases with small tweaks. So this is the main page. This is where you want to go if you really just want to throw in a couple of terms to just get a general idea on a topic. However, because we're teaching it from a more research-based area, we're going to do a formal search here. So to do that, best is to start with the controlled vocabulary, which in Embase is called Mtree. So we'll select it up here. And then we're going to start our search for type 2 diabetes. And you can see the drop-downs begun. And it tells us to use non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, which is their controlled vocabulary. It's their formal way of addressing a topic. You can see here the term tree, which lets you see where it falls. So you can see there's diabetes mellitus, and it has all of these additional things that you need to be aware of. So these could be ones that, do you want to change your focus? Is there a specific thing? In this case, we know that we're not looking for that. We're going to stick with non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. So we don't have to go any further. We also have down here our synonyms, which is why I like to run the controlled vocabulary first, because it gives me the terminology at the beginning. So now we're going to build our first search. So the first thing we want to do is add our controlled vocabulary to the query builder. So we simply select that. And because remember I said that we want to make sure that we always have a natural language version of the keyword, just in case an article hasn't had the controlled vocabulary applied to it yet, we're simply going to grab that exact term without the term that shows that it's a controlled vocabulary, which in this case is the /exp. and we're going to OR them together. And then we're going to go down and we're going to look through the synonyms. Now for this demo, I'm not going to pull every synonym, and you don't always have to pull every synonym. You want to make sure you have the major topics. This particular version, so we have type 2, and then we want to catch any articles that use type 2, but instead of writing out 2 as numerical, it uses Roman numbers. So we'll simply do that. And remember, we're putting it in quotes, or at least in single quotes in Embase. It's one of the weird things there because we want it to find that term. We don't want it to look for all of these words individually. We'll go down. Perhaps we want to get this maturity onset diabetes mellitus just to catch some different perspectives. And in case this is how someone chose to refer to it. Now, if you have ones that are just the exact same words, just in a different order, it's not as important to grab them, but we want to make sure we grab perhaps this abbreviation. And we want to grab the very standard way of referring to it. Once again, putting it in quotes. And we'll grab it one more time using the Roman numerals. So you could, in theory, go through and put every single one of these synonyms in. It's not going to harm your search, but it's a good idea to use your good judgment, use the super major terms. If you are doing something like a systematic review, then you would want to add all of those synonyms in. So with this, we're going to say we're pretty good for this initial search. So we're going to hit search. And it's going to run our search. You can see here, I've actually been practicing this demo before. So we're going to do the same thing with our second term, which is low carb diet. So you can see here we have low carbohydrate diet. Same thing, you can see where it falls. We're going to add it to the query builder. Exact same thing. Grab the free text of the controlled vocabulary. We'll go down here to our synonyms. And if you have a term that's not in the synonyms, do feel free to use it if it is a term that you know is relevant. These aren't perfect. It's not necessarily going to have every term. So it's a good idea to, be aware of the topic before you start. And let's go with this. Remembering to put them in quotes. And then we're going to run this search. And we're going to go back and we're going to do our next topic, which is the low fat diet. So same thing, follow through, add to query builder. And we want to grab fat restricted diet. Oops. So in this case where the word's reversed, you don't have to worry about including that. We're just going to want to go for natural language, the way we would say it, which would be fat restricted. As long as it includes that concept in it, the order is not as important, at least in basic searching. And perhaps we'll grab this lipid restricted diet. And then we'll grab the last, just to have a little bit of variation, the low lipid diet. So then what we'll do is we'll run this search. And now we're going to put these together. So our one concept, our second concept, our third concept, and then we're going to combine them with and, because we want to see where they intersect. And then we can now look through and see we have 191 results. So we want to go ahead and show all abstracts because that's going to show us what these search results say. We can see that in this case, they're highlighting what we're looking for. So this is really good for making sure you know why an article was gathered. And then we'll quickly scan through looking for any terms that maybe we need to add. So here we can come across Mediterranean style diet, which is a low carb diet. So we'll want to add that in. So if that's the case, what we can do is go back up to Emtree and we can search for Mediterranean style. We'll do Mediterranean. And we can see Mediterranean diet is an option. So same thing, we're going to add that to our query builder. And then we'll go down and med diet we can consider adding in. but there's not a huge amount of synonyms. And then we're simply going to search this. And then we're going to add the Mediterranean diet to our low carb string. But now instead of and, we're going to combine them with or because we want any of those terms to show up together. And now we build our search again. So we have our low carb string, we have our low fat string, and we have our problem, our diabetes string. So now we're going to combine all of those. And you can see now we've got 289 results. So it did a pretty good job of increasing our results. And so we could do the same thing. We can show the abstracts. We can look to see if there's another term, perhaps the ketogenic. In this case, we're not adding it in, but what's something we would want to consider. Start looking through, do the same thing. You can look to see what index terms an article is pulling on. So you can see what you might need to add as well. There's lots of places where you can add terms to your search because remember our searches are not one and done. It is usually 1 or 2 runs to make sure that you have the appropriate terminology. But if you've done this, if you're pretty confident with this search, this is when you can start adding those different filters we spoke about, including publication year, because remember, currency is incredibly important in health research. If we wanted to add those, we would add them now. You can start to go through, and if you were certain articles you wanted to save and take into either email to a coworker or a co-researcher or yourself, export into a database management software, which is incredibly useful. You can do that here as well. You can add it to a clipboard, and if you've created an account, you can actually save it. The other important thing to be aware of is the search details button, which is here, and this is what you would grab if you wanted to save your search, because it's got the search term pulled out right there for you. This is what most of the database's search is going to build like. There's not any significant differences. There might be aesthetic differences, there might be minor differences about how you link things together, but the ands and the ors and using the synonyms to build it are going to be universal. Thank you for joining Basic Searching. If you have any questions, remember to reach out to your librarians and we're happy to help